It is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025, House Education, continuing discussion on H54. Now we're going to have some testimony from the Vermont Independent Schools Association. There is written testimony on the website, which folks may want to pull up. And we are here to hear from the head of the Independent Schools Association, Oliver Olson. Please feel free to join us up front. Thanks for meeting our schedule and taking the time to give us some feedback on the bill.
Thank you all for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. For the record, Oliver Olson, I'm here on behalf of the Vermont Independent Schools Association. So as the chair mentioned, I did provide the committee with some written comments. I won't read through them all. I'll do my best to pull in some generative AI to summarize for you. So we, at the beginning of this year, in anticipation of this bill being discussed, we actually surveyed our members. And let me just back up for a second. So the Independent Schools Association represents approximately 42 independent schools across the state, which includes a mix of both general education schools as well as therapeutic special education only schools as well. So we have and these are schools, grades K through 12, different grade ranges, different perspectives. So we sent out a survey to our members back in January, had, I think, a really good response, heard from roughly 70% of our member schools. And the purpose of the survey was just to get an understanding of what schools are doing today. So I can, share a little bit of that with the committee, and I've summarized in the written testimony as well, just to give you a sense of what's going on within independent schools on the ground today. And the key takeaway from that is that the independent, at least those that responded, all have some form of policy already in place that prohibits the use of cell phones at school. And there's flavors of that, when you drill down in some of the detail and ask specifically, is this an outright prohibition or is it limited to classrooms only? That's where a lot of the nuance starts to develop. So I would say overall schools have a prohibition in the classroom settings, but as soon as you step outside of the classroom, that's where you start seeing some variations. One of the things that I really want to highlight is that I think the current bill may not have contemplated is that we do have boarding schools, independent schools that are operating boarding programs. So when you start getting into some of the definitions, and as I was going through the draft 1.1, and I realized there's been a few updates since, there's the notion of sort of a arrival to dismissal. And if you're in a boarding program where the school has sort of general supervision of the school, on a 24/7 basis, the definitions really do matter. And I think schools saw that definition as potentially, presenting some problems and could use some specificity. So overwhelmingly, schools are very supportive of having prohibitions, at the very least, in classrooms of cell phone use. And also, the other interesting thing is we asked, what sort of feedback have you had from your families? And overwhelmingly, the response has been very positive. Families broadly support these policies. They embrace them. They see this as really critical to learning. And the schools, universally are seeing the benefits of it. There's no doubt about it. I don't think there's any question in mind that cell phones really have, very limited, educational purpose in a classroom setting. That being said, when I sort of then, moved into, what's the appetite for a legislative mandate? And if there was a legislative mandate, what sorts of exceptions should be considered? Again, there was nuance there. So some of our members feel that there is merit to having a hard legislative mandate, but I would say a majority feel that there's enough nuance out there that needs to be considered that we might want to take a more restrained view of a hard mandate. And certainly, I think most schools feel that there need to be reasonable accommodations and exceptions. And as you start sort of peeling that onion, you find more and more things. So I know you've already heard some testimony on the medical exception. And some of these things get to how you define an electronic definition. So the current draft has a definition of an electronic device in addition to a cell phone. I think cell phone definition is pretty clear cut, but when you start getting into electronic device, that's where things can get a little tricky. And as somebody who spent the early part of my career in, electronics engineering, as I was reading that definition, I could count off all kinds of everyday items that fall within that definition, particularly in an educational setting. So a scientific calculator, that definition is going to be triggered immediately. A hearing aid. If you think about a hearing aid and how they're programmed, they're storing information, that's, literally reading the definition, that is an electronic device. So that's accommodated with some of the issues around, having a medical plan or a 504 accommodation. But that also gets into some issues that are unique to the independent school world, where we have students who are coming into Vermont, who are private pay students from outside of Vermont and also outside of the country. We do have some both gen ed and therapeutic schools that are serving students with special education needs that are not there on an IEP because they are coming from overseas, where that's a US centric concept that doesn't exist. It may exist in some other similar form. It may not exist at all. And oftentimes that's part of the reason why their parents are paying for them to attend a school that can meet their needs. So strict reading of this would not provide for those sorts of accommodations. So you start getting into things like AAC devices and things like that, could become problematic. So I just, those are some of the things that, we would suggest that you give consideration to. I know that there has been some some discussion in this committee around social media, how you define that. So I think there's a lot of concern around the same concerns that you guys have all been wrestling with in this committee. How do you define social media? And a definition that you come up with in this committee today will probably be obsolete by the time it gets before, because technology just moves so quickly. It's hard to really, sort of nail something that amorphous down to the ground. And I think there's a whole host of other sort of broader technology issues that aren't contemplated in this bill. But AI comes to mind, right? My prediction here is there's going to be a bill that's going to prohibit AI in schools, whether it's students using it or whether it's teachers using it to grade papers and things like that. This is an emerging sort of discussion in the educational world, very complex, difficult to pin down. So I just, sort of highlight that as an example of, how something, what maybe is seemingly simple as defining social media can actually be a lot more, challenging. You could make the argument, for example, that, a Google Doc could fall into that definition, depending on how you're using it. Some other I'll just give you some random examples of other things that came up. Schools that have robotics classes where a phone mobile device is used for, programming, is, one example. A phone that's with a camera that's used for a photography class is another, example. So I think generally speaking, having some similar to the construct with social media, where if an electronic device or a cell phone needs to be used as part of the educational programming, there could be a way to accommodate that. Smartwatches, I think you've had some discussion about that. A lot of times people are thinking about, an Apple Watch and accessing their text messages and things like that. But we also have a lot of schools with some very competitive athletic programs. We've got, ski academies that are literally training kids for the Olympics. They're using watches that are specifically designed to, to measure and monitor athletic performance as part of that program. So those are just a few other examples. So just a couple other points. I had some really, I thought, thoughtful and interesting comments from educators out in the field, and one of them I'll just read to you that I think I think gives us all something to think about. And this head of school commented, "I think we need to realize that social media, AI, and electronic devices are part of our world. A ban does not solve the problem, but actually has the potential for our graduates to enter the world beyond high school without being taught how to navigate social media, etc. I would advocate for some regulations and restrictions, but education being an important aspect of any legislation related to the use of electronic devices in school." So in summary, I think there are going to be a lot of challenges trying to enumerate and define various exceptions. So an alternate approach for both cell phones, electronic devices, social media could be to require schools to have a policy that's focused on a goal and an objective to restrict and minimize the use of these without a hard and fast ban. And what that would accomplish is it sends a clear signal, it provides a direction of travel, gets everybody moving in that direction, but provides the flexibility for schools and school districts to update and modify those policies to keep up with times. So I'll end it there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And probably the tail end of our conversation this morning started heading us a little bit in that more flexible direction as we struggle to define social media. Just one of the concerns I have in one of your points, it's a minor thing, but it's the sort of requirement that a student have a phone to do a school project, whether it be filming something or whatever. A publicly funded student, putting that requirement on them is something that I think we need to not have schools be doing. So that's one of the challenging issues in my mind. But again, that's sort of a bit of a minor part of what you suggested. Defining arrival and dismissal is kind of some of the key points I wrote down that you brought up. Sort of defining arrival and dismissal, defining what is the campus in which one uses these. I think many of us actually stopped. We didn't even bring up the electronic devices, but we'd actually brought that up previously for us to revisit. So I appreciate those comments, and then we can certainly look at it. This notion of foreign students attending therapeutic schools is something that you have now brought up a couple of times for us to consider. Totally hadn't thought of that, but we'll give it due consideration. Emily.
I was curious, you mentioned about the surveys. Thank you for that great feedback. The survey you sent, that didn't go to students too. You haven't surveyed students. You've only surveyed.
Correct.
Okay. So is there any plan to ask students about?
We don't. Yeah, we don't have any plans, and I think largely owing to that the policies are already in place.
I'll just say the reason I ask is because we've had some really compelling testimony on both sides of the issue from students, and I was just curious whether you had that. The other question I had was Chair Conlon just brought up the issue, but I was curious about, do you represent any schools that only board students? I don't think you do you? That are only boarding students as well?
That's a great question. Off the top of my head, I would say no. We have those schools that have boarding programs are, generally speaking, also have at least a handful of day students.
Some day students. So that was my question. If you don't have schools that are only boarding, for day students, you must have a start and end time to a day. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that would be, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Thanks.
Representative McCann.
I appreciate your testimony. I really like the restrict and minimize suggestion. And I appreciate you bringing light again to educational opportunities where a cell phone might get the job done better than some other Chromebook device here. So thank you for being here.
Do want to highlight just in the realm of exceptions and on exceptions, and I don't represent, they're not part of our association, but little known fact, the Community High School of Vermont is an independent school. And I think it's important that they not get lost in conversations in general. And I start thinking through, does everybody know what the Community High School of Vermont is?
Fill us in, because I'd like some detail.
So the Community High School of Vermont, little known fact, is actually an approved independent school. And it is run by the corrections department.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What I don't know is, do they only serve incarcerated individuals, or do they also serve individuals who are
You do.
right? So, and again, back to electronic devices, and I'm thinking about sort of monitoring things, there's potential unintended consequences there to be thinking about.
Representative Brady.
So is the kind of takeaway of this testimony on the whole, support the bill, look at some more careful exceptions, or do not support the bill?
Support the general direction of travel, but would encourage the approach of it being goal and objective oriented, rather than having a rigid requirement. So that, language, the words, restrict and minimize as a goal, that's aspirationally, that's where policy should be going, but without actually, because if you go in that direction, you don't need to get wrapped up in knots trying to figure out all the definitions and all the exceptions. And I just worry that there are so many exceptions we haven't even thought of that will come to light down the road, and that the technology moves faster than statutory language would ever be able to keep up with. So if you have a broad sort of goal and an objective that everybody can be working towards, there's that flexibility to allow for exceptions that nobody may have thought of in the legislature, and can keep up with technology.
I think we've heard quite a bit of testimony from students, from schools, from, advocacy groups that the sort of restrict and minimize is more or less the rule of are the rules of the road right now. And it's wildly different within classrooms, within a school. I mean, I can say that as a teacher in my school. Students testified this morning on that the challenge of overly flexible policies is that you are constantly, there is no clear objective can really be met when everybody's going about it differently. And sort of the one, if there's a phone in the classroom, it changes the dynamic, it changes the expectations, it changes the role of the teacher, it changes the students. And so I think we're definitely interested and concerned about some of the exceptions and the educational uses. I'm worried restrict and minimize is kind of what we're doing now, and it's kind of a mess in a lot of schools.
Any other questions? All right. Great. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time and the thought and the work you went into surveying your membership. All right, I'm going to look at our agenda and point out that tomorrow we will be on this topic from 9 to 11. with at least 45 minutes spent just sort of discussing markup. So give all of this some thought. And Beth's coming back with some new language for us anyway.